Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 154, Light of the Seven. Everyone grew quiet. Even Gemma seemed to be slightly stunned by that proclamation. The only person to not react to it at all was Castor, who had entered the grand hall a bit earlier and was now standing by one of the walls, watching Nephi's with a complex expression. Her full name was shocking to hear for two entirely different, but equally earth-shattering reasons. Firstly, she had called herself not by a human name, but by a true one. In the entire history of human civilization, only a handful of awakened had managed to earn a true name in their first nightmare. Needless to say, none of them was among the 1,000 sleepers currently trapped on the Forgotten Shore. Even Gunlog himself did not have one. But Nephi's did. And Sunny too, of course, but no one had to know that. Secondly, she had announced herself to be a legacy, and not just any legacy at that, but one from the legendary Immortal Flame clan. A clan that had been responsible for propelling the entire human species forward not once, but twice, first by helping conquer the second nightmare, then the third. A combination of these facts was enough to set off a metaphorical explosion in the middle of the Dark City. If this was true, then she could be considered to be an almost messianic existence here on the Forgotten Shore. Suddenly, the calmness with which she dared to challenge a fearsome pathfinder to a battle to the death did not seem that strange. The dazed looks in the eyes of all the sleepers gathered in the grand hall had slowly begun to give place to a subtle, tentative, weak glow. It was as though a tiny seed of hope was suddenly planted in the dead soil of their lightless, forlorn souls. Either by accident or on purpose, Nephi's chose that exact moment to summon her armor. Numerous sparks of light surrounded her in a whirlpool of soft radiance, and when they were gone, a striking black and white armor had appeared on her graceful body. Everyone's eyes were immediately glued to the symbol on its breastplate. On it, 7 shining stars were intricately engraved into the strange white metal. That symbol. Its starlight crest. The crest of the 7. Just like Sunny, many of the inhabitants of the bright castle were familiar with the symbol of the 7 stars. Not only was it carved into the robe of the giant statue standing in front of the impregnable city wall, it was also often depicted in numerous stone carvings decorating the walls of the ancient fortress. It seemed to represent the 7 heroes that had once vowed to vanquish the darkness consuming this cursed land and lead its people back into the light. Sunny felt cold sweat running down his spine. What is she doing? Is it all a coincidence, or did Nephi's plan everything? Does she not understand how these fools will react to such theatrics? If they get the wrong idea and start running their mouths about how she is some sort of a heavenly savior, Gunlog will soon come knocking on our doors. What did Neph say? Just follow her lead and try to look virtuous. Sunny stared at her back, stumped. How would he even do that? There had never been a single drop of virtue in his entire body. Meanwhile, Gemma had finally managed to compose himself and threw an evaluating look at Changing Star. If there had been nothing but neglect and disregard in his eyes before, now there was a hint of dark wariness in them. Slowly, the leader of Hunters smiled. Ah. In that case, nice to meet you. I must say, it's a very impressive name you have there. Makes one wonder where it came from. The implication behind these words was easy to understand. Gemma was insinuating that Nephi's was lying. It seemed as though this insinuation had removed a veil from everyone's eyes. Most people quickly lost their wistful expressions, once again looking at her either somberly or with dark anticipation. Only now, there were also hints of mocking disdain on some of their faces. And yet, several of them were still staring at her with expressions full of hesitant, timid faith. Changing Star did not react to any of that in any way. She simply remained calm and indifferent. As though she existed slightly apart from the dirt and despair of this world. Soon, Andal the Pathfinder was led into the grand hall. The Pathfinder was of average height and solid build, with menacing blue eyes and a sharp jaw. His head was shaved on the sides, with the remaining hair weaved into a short braid. He appeared to be slightly older than the rest of the sleepers gathered in the grand hall, with the exception of Gemma himself. Andal was probably around 24 years old. He looked like a skilled, seasoned, and ruthless fighter. Every Pathfinder was nothing less than an elite among elites, and he was no exception. Even those who hated Andal stared at him with fear and respect, even veneration. Entering the hall, Andal threw a dark look at Nephi's and walked forward to the base of the steps leading to the White Throne. There, he stopped and bowed, showing his respect to the leader of hunters. I'm here. Gemma stared at him with an irritated, contemptuous expression, and then sighed. You know why I've summoned you? The Pathfinder smirked. Some wench wants to challenge me. Good. I was very sad to let Harus have all the fun last time. Several angry whispers sounded from the crowd, but no one dared to reveal their hatred toward the arrogant murderer openly. The corner of Gemma's mouth turned downward. He remained silent for some time, and then said in a dangerous tone, Fun. Did you say fun? Well, Andal, if you lacked excitement in your life, you should have just told me. How about this? After you kill that girl, I will show you what real fun is. With that, he gestured to the guards that the fight could begin. Andal frowned a little, but then turned around with a dark smile on his lips. Sunny and Cassie were led to the side, where they joined the crowd of spectating sleepers. By that point, there was a considerable amount of them gathered in the grand hall. Everyone looked at the fearsome Pathfinder and Nephi's with a mix of tension and anticipation. Some were here just to see a macabre show, waiting with excitement for blood to flow. To them, it didn't matter who lived and who died, although none believed that the girl from the outer settlement had any chance of surviving in a duel against the experienced Pathfinder. Others wanted to see Andal punished for his crimes. But even these people seemed to believe that Neph was doomed to die. They just hoped that she would manage to make the bastard bleed a little before she did. Perhaps only Sunny, Cassie, and Castor knew that the result of this fight was not as predictable as everyone seemed to think. Not wasting any time, Andal summoned his weapon and walked toward Changing Star. In his hand, a vicious, crudely forged falchion suddenly gleamed with polished luster, its edge turning sharper than that of a razor. With a shudder, Sunny realized that not even the Starlight Legion armor would stop such a blade. The Pathfinder's movements were soft and deceptive, betraying years of experience in bloody battles against both nightmare creatures and humans. The dark smile had never left his lips, and there was bloodlust burning in his eyes. After years spent hunting monsters, he looked like a monster himself. However, Nephi's just stood there calmly and watched him approach, not even trying to summon her sword. What is she doing? Trying to mimic Harus. When the distance between them shortened to that of only several steps, everyone held their breaths. Suddenly, Andal flourished his cleaver and lunged forward with astonishing, almost inhuman speed. His push was so powerful that dust flew into the air from under the soles of his boots. Sunny clenched his fists. What is she? Just a fraction of a second before the magically enhanced blade cleaved her apart, Nephi suddenly sidestepped the strike and threw her arms into the air, simultaneously summoning her long sword. The ethereal sparks of light passed through the blade of Andal's falchion, forming into silvery steel only on the other side of it. The Pathfinder's eyes widened. Forever. Without anything separating it from the enemy's flesh, the long sword that had just formed from the thin air behind the falchion bit into his neck, cleanly severing Andal's head from his shoulders. As blood shot into the air from the Pathfinder's neck, his head rolled on the floor like a macabre ball and stopped near the steps that led to Gunlog's white throne. It seemed as though all oxygen was suddenly sucked out of the great hall. In the deathly silence, Andal's body heavily fell on the white marble. Everyone was staring at Nephi's in utter disbelief, the sleepers, the guards, even Gemma. Honestly, Sunny himself was a bit stunned. Of course, he had suspected that Changing Star might win the duel. But even he did not expect that she would kill an actual Pathfinder, one of the most fearsome warriors in the Bright Castle, with just one strike. Dismissing her sword with a cold expression on her face, Nephi's walked over to the marble steps, picked up the severed head by the hair, and looked up at the leader of the hunters. Then, with a well-practiced polite smile, she said, "Oh. It was nice to meet you too." Chapter 155, First Recruits. The blood was still dripping from Andal's severed head when they left the castle. Nephi's was holding it by the hair, her face as indifferent as always. It seemed as though carrying human heads was not even something worthy of changing facial expressions. Suddenly, Sunny saw Changing Star in a new light. It was a long time since he had last been wary of her, but now, he was starting to wonder. Just how many people had she killed in the past? The facial expressions of everyone else, though, ranged from astonishment to horror. People who had witnessed the duel stared at Nephi's as though she was some sort of an avenging angel. The others treated her like a terrifying demon. I wonder. How much soul's essence had she absorbed with this one kill? Has to be a lot, right, but those were just the inhabitants of the castle. The reactions of the people of the outer settlement were strangely reserved, but even more intense. They had never seen one of them stroll into the ancient fortress and walk away freely with the severed head of a pathfinder in their hands. Now, all of them were watching silently, an inexorable, dark, sweltering emotion burning in their eyes. All of it made Sunny very uncomfortable. He wasn't sure if Nephi's knew what kind of a storm her stunt had evoked in the hearts of these people. That sort of emotion was dangerous and almost impossible to control. If she didn't know, things could turn really bad really quickly. But it was even worse if she did, and had done it on purpose. Was Neph really capable of such ingenious and effective manipulation? Was this her plan all along? Sunny wasn't sure that he knew this side of Changing Star. Come to think of it, he didn't really know that much about her at all. Consumed by these doubts, Sunny didn't even notice that they were already in front of Effie's cabin. He glanced at the sky, only to see the sun hiding behind the ominous silhouette of the crimson spire. It was evening, just like Nephi's had promised. Scary. The unruly huntress opened the door before they even knocked, a hint of irritation in her eyes. What's with all the commotion? Can't a girl spend a day in? Noticing the three of them, she froze. Without so much as batting an eye, Nephi simply threw Andel's head to Effie's feet and asked, "Can we talk now?" Looking down at the macabre present, the huntress narrowed her eyes. Her face darkened. A few moments later, she glanced up and said in a grim voice, "Come inside." As soon as the door closed behind them, Effie asked in a furious whisper, "What the hell have you done, princess?" Nephi's tilted her head and slightly frowned. Then, she said with a hint of sincere confusion in her voice, "You wanted me to prove my strength. Did you not?" The huntress stared at her in disbelief. Misunderstanding her silence, Neph blinked, then added, "Oh. That head belonged to. I know whose head it is. Where did you get it?" Sunny sighed and slumped heavily on one of the sturdy chests. Then he forced out a dark smile and said, "Oh, by the way. You might be the last human in the Dark City to learn this, but standing right in front of you is none other than Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan, the champion of justice. She just walked into the castle, challenged the bastard, and killed him with one strike of her sword, right under everyone's eyes. By now, this must be the only thing people are talking about." His tone lacked any kind of amusement. If anything, it seemed as though Sunny was just barely stopping himself from cursing out loud. Why? Why did trouble have to follow him everywhere he went? While Neph and Cassie were anxiously waiting for Effie's response, Sunny just stared at his shadow, hoping to find some sympathy. Sadly, there wasn't any to be found. The shadow was just staring back at him, full of jubilant gloating. Effie, meanwhile, blinked a couple of times and looked at them with a strange expression. That's right. Run while you can. Then, she threw her head back and laughed out loud. Oh. Oh, gods. Did you really? This is priceless. I wish I'd seen their faces. Sunny watched her with his mouth wide open. That was not the reaction he had been expecting. Crazy, they're all crazy. I'm surrounded by crazy people. When Effie finished laughing, she glanced at Changing Star with a dark, but gleeful expression. All right, you have proven your point. But there's something you should know. Back when I refused to join the host, Gunlog made it clear that if he can't have me, no one else will. Ever since, any group that dared to invite me to join them ended up regretting their decision. By hiring me as a guide, you will be putting yourself in his crosshairs. Are you sure you want to do this? So there was more to her story. No wonder she was so solitary. In the ensuing silence, Sunny was the first one to speak. His voice sounded bitter and dejected. I mean, it's a bit late to worry about that. Don't you think? The next morning, they were preparing to go on a hunt. A small crowd of slum dwellers gathered around to see them off, their dark eyes burning with a strange mix of hope and anguish. By now, the story of Changing Star's clever ruse and heroic battle against villainous Pathfinder Andal had already flown all over the place, growing more and more unbelievable with each retelling. Now, these people came to witness her with their own eyes. They were especially interested in the Starlight Legion armor and the symbol engraved on its breastplate. Who knew that the memory of a simple carapace centurion would have such an effect on the inhabitants of the Dark City? Sunny was not happy about it at all. The previous evening, he had a chance to ask Nephi's a few questions after they had returned to their lodge. However, he kept most of them to himself, not knowing how to properly express his feelings. In the end, he only asked about how she had managed to defeat her human opponent, who was much more powerful in terms of physical prowess, so easily. Changing Star's answer was very simple. She just shrugged and said, "An old legacy trick." Which pretty much explained everything and nothing at all. And now, they were going into the Dark City to hunt monsters. When the four of them were ready to set off, a sudden hum of voices made them turn around. The slum dwellers stepped aside, letting a tall young man walk through. Sunny frowned. Great. What is he doing here? Walking closer, Castor stopped a few meters away from them and gave a polite bow. Lady Nephis, Huntress Athena, Kasha, Sunny. Good morning to all of you. I, Castor of the Hanley clan, would like to join your hunting party. Will you have me? Everyone grew quiet for a few moments. Despite Sunny's dislike of the handsome legacy, having him on their side would be an incredible boon. Genius fighters like Castor were hard to come by anywhere, let alone on the Forgotten Shore. He felt torn. A buzz of whispers rose from the crowd. People were shocked to see a warrior from the castle volunteering to join an outer settlement cohort. And one of such fearsome reputation, too. After some time had passed, Changing Star simply shrugged. If you want. Just like that, the proud scion of the Hanley clan had become the fifth member of their hunting party. It was strange to see their numbers grow after months spent alone in the labyrinth, but that was probably inevitable. What else did Sunny expect? That it would be just the three of them forever. Stupid. Together, the five sleepers left the slum of the outer settlement behind and stepped on the road of white stone that lead into the cursed ruins. And just like that, the fates of every human in the Dark City were sealed. The end had begun. Chapter 156, Free Lunch. Their first hunt was surprisingly uneventful. Guided by an experienced pathfinder and augmented by Sunny's stealthy shadow, they managed to avoid any fallen creatures and arrive at the destination in one piece. There, the group hid in the ruins and waited for their prey to show up. The plan of battle was discussed beforehand. After Effie had described the type of monster they were here to kill, complete with a detailed list of its strengths and weaknesses, Nephis quickly assigned different roles to different people. Sunny had expected that things would work just like back in the labyrinth, but to his surprise, they did not. Just like before, Neph was going to take most of the risk and lure the enemy into revealing its vulnerability. However, Castor was going to be the one to make use of it and deal the fatal blow, not Sunny. Which made sense, really. After all, his ability was not a combat one, at least not officially. It was rational to entrust the role to someone with an incredibly powerful combat ability, as the one Castor possessed. Still, for some reason, Sunny felt angry about it. It felt as though he was being replaced. Not wishing to appear childish, he swallowed his bitterness and remained silent. When the monster did show up, everything went perfectly. Nephis and Castor were able to finish the creature off without sustaining any injuries. Their teamwork, while not effortless, was strangely harmonious, probably because both were legacies and had received similar kind of training. Sunny, whose task was to join the fray if things went wrong, ended up not having to lift a finger. Neither did Effie, who simply stayed with Cassie in case the blind girl needed protection. After everything was over, she laughed. This is the easiest meal I've ever earned. Effie's status in the party was a bit strange. Unlike the rest of them, she had not shown any desire to join the cohort officially. Instead, she was somewhat of a hired worker. Her responsibilities included guiding the party through the ruins and providing them with information, and nothing else. She wasn't even required to fight side by side with them. After the nightmare creature was dead, they quickly butchered it and left the scene of the battle loaded with a heavy weight of meat. Before the shadow of the Crimson Spire fell on the Dark City, the cohort was already approaching the marble arch at the base of the hill. This was when something unexpected finally happened. And it happened because of Nephis. After giving a fair share of the spoils to the vigorous huntress, she glanced at Sunny, Cassie, and Castor. Then, Changing Star said, "I would like for you three to entrust me with your part of the meat." What? What is that about? Before Sunny had an opportunity to ask a question, Cassie already smiled and said, "Of course, Neph." Castor did not linger, either. With a small bow, he nodded. As you wish, Lady Nephis. Sonny gritted his teeth. After that, he would have looked like a complete jerk if he were to start interrogating her. Especially because, technically, he had not done anything except for lending his shadow to Effie. Nephis and Castor were the ones who had actually risked their lives. Fine. Nephis gave them a nod and continued walking up the white road. When they returned to the outer settlement, she separated the remaining share of monster meat into 2 parts. One, much smaller part, she handed to Cassie. The other, incomparably larger part, she simply placed on the white stones in front of their lodge. Effie looked at the whole process with curiosity. So did the slum dwellers who had gathered to welcome them back. Sonny frowned. What are you doing? Changing Star glanced at him and then gestured to the small bundle of meat in Cassie's hands. This is for us to sustain ourselves. We will eat that meat until our next hunt. Somebody from the crowd shouted, what about the rest? Are you selling it? What is your price? It was customary for the outer settlement hunters to sell some of their spoils. That was how people here fed themselves. The meat could be exchanged for items, services, or, in very rare cases, actual shards. Neff turned to the people who had gathered around and looked at them with a frown. When everyone grew quiet, she said in a cold tone, my hunting party will not be selling any meat. Ever. Before anyone had time to react, dismayed by that answer, she took a step to the side, gestured to the large pile of meat, and said, instead, we will be giving it away for free. A dead silence hung above the edge of the outer settlement. The slum dwellers who had come to catch a glimpse of Changing Star or in hope of procuring some food were all looking at Nephis with a dark mix of mistrust, disbelief, and suspicion. After a while, someone shouted, what trick are you trying to play? People here are hungry, Changing Star. Shame on you. Nephis crossed her arm, furrowed her brow, and answered, there is no trick. Everyone is free to take a small share of the meat to fill their stomach. The young men who had accused her before laughed. Why would you just hand it out for free? Do you think that we're fools? Sonny was being tormented by the same question. He often joked about Neff's foolish nobility, but he also knew that she wasn't really stupid. She always had a reason for everything she did, even if those reasons sometimes seemed insane to him. Lately, he even started to suspect that Neff was much more cynical and pragmatic than he had ever given her credit for. It's just that her version of cynicism was very different from his own. What was she doing? Meanwhile, Nephis pierced the shouter with a cold look, scowled, and said, a hint of anger in her voice, why? Am I not a human? Are you not humans? Does a human need a reason to help others of her kind in this cursed place? She took a step forward and looked at the gathered people, making them shiver under her heavy gaze. Shame on me. No. Shame on you all for forgetting who you are. We are people, not beasts. In the real world or in the dream realm, this is who we are. Her words echoed above the white stones, mixing with the howling wind. Now come forward and take some food if you're hungry. The slum dwellers were still not convinced. However, their hunger was stronger than their wariness. Soon, the first of them stepped forward, tentatively took a small strip of meat, threw a furtive glance at Nephis, and then hurriedly walked away. When the others saw that nothing happened to him, they became braver. Young men and women dressed in rags formed a messy line. One by one, they came forward, received their tiny piece of meat, and then disappeared with haste, afraid that it will be taken back. Slowly, a new kind of light appeared on their faces. It was the same timid, weak emotion that Sonny had noticed in the eyes of the castle inhabitants after Neff had announced her name. It was something that precipitated hope, or maybe faith. With a dark expression on his face, Sonny looked up, at the tiny silhouettes of guards observing them from the walls of the magnificent fortress. Nephis was right when she said that they were all still people. However, she was wrong about everything else. Because people were much worse than beasts. He did not like what was happening at all.